A good morning and welcome to the Youth at the Forefront conversation. We're joining you from Kampala at the Golf Course Hotel. Thank you to everyone who's joining us through the platform of NTV Uganda, and thank you to everyone who is in the room today. Now, you've often heard the conversation, or you've often heard the opinion that Uganda has a majority young population. It's not just a matter of opinion, it's actually a matter of fact. 55% of Uganda's population is below the age of 18, and another 23% is between the ages of 18 and 30. Now, those young people have dreams, aspirations, and ambitions, and all of that happens within the fiscal space provided by the government of Uganda. Today in this dialogue, we'll take part in that conversation on how to put the youth at the forefront of this dialogue. And I want us to start off with by getting our welcoming remarks from Mr. Nixon Ogwal, who is the current Interim Programs Director at Action Aid Uganda. The floor is all yours. A round of applause for him as he makes his way here.
Good morning. You're almost welcome to this very important discussion in Uganda at a time when the country is opening up the economy by day in order to reinstate normalcy in terms of life. ActionAid and Siatini are at the forefront of providing leadership to the tax justice network in Uganda, but also in the region. And for that matter, I would like to first of all ask for those who are tax justice members, can you raise your hands? Those who are in the room? Thank you very much. I know so many who are watching are, and we would like to applaud you. We so much also want to welcome all the other actors in the Ugandan economy, especially the Ministry of Finance. And here with us we have the director from Ministry of Finance, who is going to be so crucial, but also all other actors who are in the room. I also want to thank you for observing the standard operating procedures. Please keep on your masks and as much as possible, keep social distance. Why is it that physical governance is important? According to Tax Justice Network, we have got 3 pillars of things we look at as very important in our campaign. Number 1 is revenue generation. Why do we look at this? Which is about taxation, by the way. We believe that for Uganda to have sustainable, gender-responsive, quality services, we must have money for government to use. And we must have it in good amount, in a sustainable way, and money that the Ugandans have got power over. That is only what we can generate from our taxes. And therefore we believe that promoting an effective tax system in the country where each citizen not only pays tax, but because they pay tax, they have a voice, is what we promote. The majority of Ugandans are actually young people. So what a better effort to actually promote the voices of young people, to actually ensure that the tax in this country, the tax policies in this country are working. We need increasingly a progressive tax system in Uganda. We have in the past had most of our taxes actually regressive. It means that the poorer you are, the more of the proportion of what you earn you pay. But we have been working with the Uganda Revenue Authority, Ministry of Finance and others, and this is changing. But you know, young people, many as they are also one of the poorest categories of people in this country. So the more we have regressive taxes, the more you are actually dampening the ability of majority of people to produce wealth upon which we can tax. So we value a lot revenue generation. So this discussion about revenue generation today is very important. The second element of our tax justice campaign is about gender responsive budgeting. That is why we have been investing a lot with other colleagues in improving how the different ministries, agencies, and departments of government understand the principles and practice of gender responsive budgeting. And because of that, there's a big improvement in this. However, we still must engage in this because we can raise much money which in no way serves to improve the quality of life of a Ugandan unless it is appropriated well. Again, in this, there's a lot of work ongoing. Maybe today we might not dig deeper in this than the first. However, the young people, again, are a very important voice in ensuring that at district level, at sub-county level, at national level, that our budgeting are following the voices and the needs of the country, of the young people, of productive sectors of the economy, but also to provide critical services. Right now, for instance, you all know that a critical service is actually the health services that are saving lives of Ugandans. Just imagine if we lacked money to respond. So we must have the rightful way of budgeting. The third element is actually one that brings these physical elements, the budgeting and then the revenue generation to a check. It is about fighting corruption. You can do right to appropriate the budget, but also raise the revenue. If you do not plug the leaks, then the tax justice campaign, the efforts of generating income for the economy can still completely go to waste. You all know how much leakage we still have, that most of our budgets are not used. And the reason why they are not used is very funny. We don't even need to talk about it probably here. So, colleagues, as we get into a discussion today, I would like to, as much as possible, welcome you to look at how we use the majority of the population of Uganda as the young people to get gainful employment, self-employment. The young people in this country are the most innovative. They have energy and time, and they are willing to rigorously participate in productive sectors of the economy. They need to be mobilized, they need to be organized, but they also need amongst themselves to develop capability to manage the resources in their hands. We need to see that we put more money into micro and medium-sized enterprises, government resources, to give a strong leap into very productive enterprises in this country. The more the young people are productive in big number and in the active part of the economy, the more we shall actually have government revenue. So it is important that during this time of corona, as government is talking about putting more money into the hands of people, that the young people, especially young women, should be targeted. Our own experiences as ActionAid and other development actors show that money that is put into the hands of women for businesses is easily retained in the business and produces more money for production. But those that are put in the hands of men, the same proportion, very little continues to produce more wealth. And yet, women, young women, are the majority category in this country. Therefore, it is important that issues of demanding for collaterals that make it difficult for young women to access those investment resources need to be looked at. As we discussed today, we should be looking at that, because then we shall have more revenue in the very short and medium term for this economy. And yet again, money that is invested in a woman is invested in the welfare of the family. In many ways, before you know it, the quality of life that this country requires will be achieved through actually investing in young women. If our efforts, the efforts of the third national development plans, the aspiration is to improve the quality of life of a Ugandan, then this is what we should do now, not tomorrow. The other thing that we need to do is to ensure as much as possible that we reach out to the unreached areas of this country with such money and financing, the rural and the informal. It is important that we bring this into the active economy. The majority of the young people are actually in the rural and the informal economy. We need to reach them with more investments. And that this money which we are promising must go with the technical support services that will unhold the young people into doing their business. We also need to put more money to support innovation in this country. Uganda is the most innovative country in the world, and it is in our young people. Unfortunately, the innovations that they start and the businesses that they generate or also found do not live to their third birthday because of lack of technical support and hand-holding. This is what we need if we are to ensure that our tax system will actually be growing to grow the economy. I would like to, at this point, end here and leave other things for the eminent discussants to come and put on the floor. But also, I would like to encourage as much as possible those who are watching online, those who are following on TV, please use the hashtag Youth for Tax Justice to engage in this discussion. I would like to thank you very much. Back to you, our moderator for the day. God bless you all, Ugandans.
Let's have a bigger round of applause for Nixon. Now, Nixon has ushered us into the conversation that we are supposed to have today. And without wasting much further time, I will invite from the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Moses Kagwa, to come and give us our keynote address. Do take notes when he's giving his keynote address, because very immediately we'll be taking your reactions to that keynote address. Mr. Kagwa, the floor is all yours. Also, if you want to take part in this conversation, use the hashtag Youth for Tax Justice and the hashtag AYMUG20.
There's no spray. They said you should do a spray. Now I can take off my mask, but only for being here on the podium. distinguished participants, the Director Programs Action Aid representing the Country Director, the Country Director Siatini, and all who are here and here virtually. It's a pleasure for me to be here and talk to the youth, especially about the taxation, but also about the economic and social impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the youth in Uganda. The COVID-19 outbreak has severely curtailed output for economies worldwide and is projected to plunge some into recession. Output, which we refer to as the gross domestic product, growth globally has declined, with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries projected to decline by a half percentage point. Tourism has come to a halt globally, as many passenger airlines and some transport services suspended operations as the scare of COVID-19 intensified. Supply and logistic chains were also affected, and sub-Saharan economies in general are projected to go into recession as a result of the pandemic. But individually, some countries may achieve positive growth rates. Uganda's population, as already mentioned, comprises more than 70% youth, most of who earn livelihood on a day-to-day basis, and any long disruption in their activities affects them adversely. What has been the impact of COVID-19 on the domestic economy? Initially, Uganda experienced reduced demand for our exports and the disruption in supply chains on one hand, and on the other, there were unique opportunities that have become available to the Ugandan economy. Although lower than previously projected, Uganda's economic growth will be positive because of the resilience of our economy and the planned government interventions. The subsectors which are key in this resilience include food and cash crops, manufacturing, and the telecom services. The temporary effects of the pandemic will be manifested in our balance of payments in the areas of tourism, exports, workers' remittances, and foreign direct investment. Our economy expanded by 2.9% in 2019-2020, which is less than the earlier projected of 3.1%. But this is also less than what we had projected of 6% at the beginning of that year. This growth was also less than the rosy growth of 6.8% recorded in the year before. And this reduction has been mainly due to the adverse effects of COVID-19 pandemic and the related containment measures. However, indicators of economic activity show recovery in this financial year so far, with both the Purchaser Managers Index and the Composite Index of Economic Activity showing improvement in the level of economic activity in the months of August and September, respectively. Similarly, sentiments about doing business in Uganda, as measured by the Business Tendency Index, turned positive, recording above 50% for the first time since February 2020. This index, the Business Tendency Index, was 50.8 in September 2020. We also noticed that we have had some inflation that has been brought in as a result of increased transport costs, but we are seeing it going down, and in September it was 4.5%, and we expect that it will be below the target of 5% for the whole year. We have seen that there's been a decline in prices of food items, as well as the reduction in price increases in energy, fuels, and utilities. A survey was carried out by UBOS in March to April 2020, which showed the devastating impact of COVID-19 lockdown on the economy. One, overall estimated gross output went down by 20.7% in the month of April 2020. Two, 29.4% of the businesses closed operations during the April 2020 lockdown period. Three, about 34.8% and 34.5% of the manufacturing establishment operated at 26 to 50% and 51 to 75% utilization capacity, respectively. 2.1% of the establishment introduced new products during this period. Very good thing. We had sanitizers, we had PPPs, which were brought, and then 51.5% of the establishment reduced their payroll size as a result of the lockdown. 85.8% of the sectors of the economy put in place safety measures in order to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic. 7, largest GDP losses were anticipated to come from tourism, because tourism really is not moving, wholesale and retail, transport, manufacturing, and agriculture, primarily exports. A lot of sectors which were locked down employ and are owned by the youth. These include, of course, salons. Most of the youth own these, bars and nightclubs, and the people who work in bars and nightclubs are youth. Saunas, beauty parlors, events management like music shows and launches, and then tourism. The lockdown also affected education, leading to unwarranted consequences. Whereas some students had opportunities to learn online, in the media and other avenues, some, especially from the poor background, did not. The slow learners also could not learn, as there were no teachers to try and explain to them the concepts that were being administered on radio and in the print media. And of course, this lockdown has led to some girls getting pregnant. Some of these youth have actually got pregnant, and they may be out of school. There was also a rise in gender-based violence in the youth, as youth lost jobs, and there was a lot of frustration that set in. Some youth even took their own lives when their means of livelihood were withdrawn. You remember the famous case of Masaka when a boda boda was taken, and then the gentleman decided to take his life. A lot of youth who were working abroad lost their jobs, and a lot of them suffered mistreatment before returning to Uganda. Then there were those ones who were supposed, of course, to go and work. They couldn't go to work because the places where they should have worked were also closed. 2.3 to 3 million formal and informal jobs are at risk, and they are largely informal, particularly in wholesale and retail, manufacturing, and the tourism sectors. This affects mostly the youth. So, are we just going to lament? Of course, these are the negatives, but there are opportunities which exist that COVID-19 has helped to expedite strategies to harness the wealth potential. What are these opportunities? Of course, in the wake of COVID-19, Government is mobilizing the people, especially to the youth, to take advantage of the opportunities. In terms of strategic planning, this calls for two things. One, expansion of the production base to support industrialization, especially agro-industrialization. You know that agriculture contributes now about 22.4% to GDP, but employs more than 70%. So if we are to look at employment, then agriculture is important. Two, boosting final and intermediate demand for locally produced goods and services and mobilizing external markets for our goods. You can produce goods, but if there is no demand, then it's as good as waste. The priority areas government has identified are the following. One, food production for domestic consumption, food security, and for export. You've heard the president talking about the real economy. Because you don't have food, you can't eat. So that is important. The youth can engage in food production on leased land, can form associations for food production, like the guys who have done it in Kapchorwa, and agribusiness, or seek employment in this sector. Two, expansion of agro-based industrialization based on 14 crops and animals, namely bananas, maize, Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, cassava, beans, millet, sugarcane, tea, coffee, cocoa, livestock, and livestock we take beef and dairy, and fish. 4, textiles for clothing using inputs such as cotton and inorganic petroleum products when oil and gas are exploited, and leather products using locally available hides and skins. A lot of youth have been skilled in tailoring of apparel, shoes and handbags, and others have benefited from the presidential initiative on the girl child. Shelter, housing focusing on production of bricks, this is for the youth, working with mining and construction companies to produce glass from sand, production of granite, and production of marble using our vast resources, particularly in Karamoja. 6, use of digital systems for supply of goods and services. There are opportunities for delivery of groceries. I've seen this already being done by the youth, to households that need them, working from home. A lot of people are working from home because initially the cost of renting offices was very high, but now you can work from home and you can conduct meetings virtually. 7, registering with Uganda Petroleum Revenue, Uganda Petroleum Authority in the local talent register. Enhancing further our physical infrastructure and transport platforms, including support to local production and transport and other strategic vehicles. 8, human development in areas of education with emphasis on science and health. 9, mindset change of the youth to move away from the dependency culture to become innovators and captains of businesses. I think this is the time. 10, skills development so that the youth can be useful citizens. A total of 7,000 youth are benefiting from government scholarships and vocational training. There also exist skills developments under the private sector foundation unit, where government makes a financial contribution to employers to provide internship to the youth. This program has been successful, and over 75% of the youth graduates that undergo internships have been retained by the employers. Equally, UDB is providing business development services to startups, and startups are mostly for the youth, after which it can lend them money. So they help to handhold these startups and then there is money that is provided. The youth can also take advantage of the interest in Movable Property Act to access loans with movable property as security, because this covers both tangible and intangible assets. What did government do? Specific economic responses to COVID-19. Most of this has been mentioned, so I'll go through it briefly. We had intermediate interventions to prevent and contain the outbreak of COVID-19. A lot of PPEs were purchased for the youth. We have masks, we have all these, and there is testing, mass testing, and people who are sick are being cared for. There was the immediate fiscal and monetary interventions, and then accelerating the import substitution and export promotion agenda. Also, another strategy was increasing agricultural production and productivity. And lastly, increasing household incomes and employment through support to clusters of trades, occupations for increased employment and income generation. The fiscal and monetary policy measures to enable private businesses and firms meet their immediate liquidity needs in order to continue production and provision of services included allowing small and medium-sized enterprises to delay payment of tax for due between April and June 2020. So there was a lot of tax which was allowed to be delayed. And for tourism and manufacturing and horticulture, these ones were allowed. They were not just SMEs, but anyone who was in tourism, manufacturing, horticulture, and floriculture. They deferred their payments of taxes until December 2020. There was also deferring of pay-as-you-earn tax by those sectors which are most affected up to December 2020. A lot of companies, especially SMEs owned by the youth, owed URA a lot of money, and URA had slumped interest and penalties on them. These interest and penalties were waived. And there was support, of course, to water and electricity utilities in order to ensure continued supply of these essential services. And this happened especially in April to June 2020. There was expediting of the payment of outstanding VAT refunds to enterprises that had refunds with URA. There was payment of domestic areas for goods and services supplied to government by the private sector. And then for those unable to pay their loans, government through Bank of Uganda put in place measures to support businesses, including allowing extension of repayment periods, relaxing the conditions for non-performing loans, reduction of reserve funds commercial banks are required to keep with Bank of Uganda, and creating a special liquidity facility to rescue businesses that are not able to meet operational costs due to low demand or reduced production due to COVID-19. And there's also the capitalization of Uganda Development Bank with an additional 1 trillion shillings in the medium term to provide low interest financing to businesses, including small-scale farms. There was capitalization of Uganda Development Corporation with Uganda shillings 100 billion to enable government to invest in strategic areas. So for SMEs, the youth can actually partner with UDC to co-finance their projects. There was boosting of funding to Uganda Industrial Research Institute to continue with innovative research and incubation of business startups, which are mostly owned by the youth. So the youth can take advantage if they have scientific startups and work with URI. There was securing to about 250 million euros for the development of Kampala Industrial Business Park at Namanve, and 198 million euros for power transmission and substations for Mbale, Kapeka, Boyogere, Kasese, Soroti, Luzira, Jinja, and Barara industrial parks to provide employment for the youth. Government has also started EMYOGA, I think you have heard of EMYOGA, by organizing communities involved in formal economic activities. EMYOGA is clustering of people involved in similar trades, such as cottage textiles, shoemakers, jiwakalis, artisans, making furniture, and providing them with financing, skills, training, and equipment to increase their production. Shillings 266 billion has been provided for this initiative. Money has also been provided through SACCOs and the microfinance institutions to support micro and small-scale enterprises, which are owned mostly by the youth. The interventions that government, of course, has also, we have the youth program under State House, about 130 billion has been provided. The youth fund, money has also been provided there. The women fund, 32 million has been provided. And then there is the innovation fund with the Ministry of ICT, about 22 billion has been provided. So this money is supposed to help the youth during this period to make sure that they continue with production, or those ones who are in employment to continue in employment. So with all this, of course, government has made these have financial implications, yet the money is not readily available. Government budget for financial year 2020-21 stands at 45.4 trillion, yet the revenue expected from tax and non-tax resources is 19 trillion 878 billion. If we are to finance our development agenda, therefore, we must enhance domestic revenue mobilization. So, the youth should be interested in our tax process and the actions that we are taking to improve domestic revenue mobilization. If you know it, for every 100 shillings that is produced in this country, government is only taking 13 shillings in taxes. In other countries, the take by government from what is produced is much more. Sub-Saharan average, they take 16% of what is produced in the country. In the developed countries, they take 30, in fact in some countries up to 50%. The Nordic countries take almost 50% of what is produced in this country. But for us, we are only taking a paltry 13%. And as I've showed you, there is a big difference between what we are collecting and actually what we should spend. And this deficit is about 8.6 for this financial year. And if we don't collect any more money, it will keep raising. Our debt is increasing, and we need to pay it because we are borrowing money, and we need to pay. So far, we are borrowing from the domestic market about 3.45 trillion. But because of the challenges we have, we may have to increase the borrowing for domestically. And this is not sustainable. We don't want to reach a time when we can't pay our debts. Some countries like Zambia, they have already had challenges with paying debt. And the only solution is actually to raise revenues domestically. So government has developed a domestic revenue mobilization strategy which is premised on the need and potential to generate sufficient domestic revenues to deliver essential public goods and services required to achieve the National Development Plan 3 goals. The tax system can be utilized to generate manifold benefits to our society and the economy, such as promoting investments and economic growth, empowering women and minorities, protecting the environment, and reducing inequalities. In the financial year 2021-22, our tax policy and compliance efforts will focus on the following strategic priorities: promoting equitable tax policies. That's one. Two, improving the efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency of revenue administrations. We have URA, and we also have the local government administrations. Three, aligning policies for improved domestic revenue mobilization. Four, enhancing tax system responsiveness to citizens' needs. And five, improving the transparency of the tax system. Equitable and effective tax systems serve a purpose beyond raising domestic revenue. Only if public revenues collected are spent on development priorities in an efficient, effective, transparent, and accountable manner will they help to build strong state-citizen relations and a prosperous Ugandan society. Accordingly, we'll focus our efforts on sensitizing Ugandans on the role of tax in economic development and demonstrate to them how taxes have been utilized. Specifically, government will foster equity of the tax system in order to reduce inequalities and advance the social contract, and will strengthen progressive revenue sources and advance the level of progressivity within the tax and non-tax revenue sources. We will monitor the impact of tax policies on equity. Two, will improve the efficiency of revenue administration and counteract the cost pressure through modernization. We are modernizing URA a lot. Will enhance the effectiveness of URA by increasing efforts to curb non-compliant behavior and ensuring that URA has the necessary capacities and capabilities to audit high net worth individuals and local and multinational companies. We will strengthen the accountability and transparency of revenue administration by enhancing institutional capacity and human resource development. Three, implement what you call the whole of government approach on tax and development, working across jurisdiction boundaries of government, ministries, departments, and agencies to improve revenue mobilization. Collecting taxes effectively is complex and requires cooperation across state agencies, making it the leading edge of the broader development of our institutions. Four, improve tax transparency. I think this is very important for you, by publishing tax expenditures regularly to facilitate cost effectiveness assessments, ultimately helping to reduce wasteful tax expenditures. We have a lot of tax holidays, we have a lot of tax incentives in the law, but what we are going to do now, we have a tax expenditure framework where we are going to make sure that every year we are publishing who has got this incentive, what have been the benefits to the economy, what have been the benefits in terms of employment, what have been the benefits in terms of adding value to our raw materials, what has been the benefits in terms of exports. So all this is going to be there. Six, we'll also implement joint and individual action to combat tax-motivated illicit financial flows and tax avoidance by strengthening tax governance and fiscal transparency, reducing financial secrecy that has been disturbing us a lot, and intensifying the extent of information and technical expertise. Now we are exchanging information with other tax administrations all over the world to know what our taxpayers are declaring in those countries, and they are also giving us information on what our taxpayers are earning from those jurisdictions. So there is that exchange of information. 6, providing an enabling environment for taxpayers and tax practitioners to be meaningful involved in tax and revenue formulation matters. This is very important, especially for the youth. When your voice is going to be heard? We have provided this forum. Unfortunately, we don't have a homogeneous group called the youth. But I wish you can form it, and then we'll be consulting you. But we've had a lot of consultations with the civil society organizations, with the public, on the policies and the measures we intend to introduce next year, so that we have a buy-in of everybody in this process. So this, we think, will strengthen your role in analyzing tax policies, advocating for or against policy proposals, and raising awareness on tax rights and obligations. We want you to know your rights, we want you to know your obligations. And finally, of course, finalize and implement comprehensive, prioritized, and costed domestic revenue mobilization implementation plan. We are doing an implementation plan on the proposals that we are making after public consultations with relevant stakeholders. Thank you so much for listening to me. Ooh. These are complicated.
A bigger round of applause for Mr. Kagwa. He is responsible for making sure we have a good budget. So, as I earlier told you, we'll have reactions to his keynote address almost immediately. So we've put in place 2 people with a microphone and sanitizer. I'm only going to take 2 questions because we also have to get into a panel. So the first 2 hands I see are the ones that I will take. I'll take the gentleman here. You can take the microphone to him, and then switch it on. The microphone is switched on.
Okay, good morning.
Yes.
My name is Kafko John Po. I'm from Youth for Tax Justice Network. I would like to thank Mr. Kagwa for that wonderful presentation. I just have 2 reactions to the presentation. First of all, Mr. Kagwa told us the measures that have been put in place by government to combat the effects of COVID-19 on the young people. Some of them came, most of them actually came through the budget reading processes. Though, from my point of view, I would have expected that he should have updated us about, for example, this money that was put in Uganda Development Corporation, the UDC, the UBC. How far, how many young people, for example, have access to this money? How many SMEs, how many SMEs? Because on the ground, when you talk to most of the young people in these groups, they tell you the bureaucracy processes are so hard, this money is very difficult to get. So I would have expected probably an update on how many, for example, how many SMEs, how many MSMEs have access to this credit. It also applies to the issue of restructuring of loans. We talk about, you say, many SMEs have been allowed to restructure their loans, but going to the banks, most of them are complaining that the interest rates are still high. And of course, Bank of Uganda has come in to try and regulate, but what is happening on ground is actually very different from what is on paper. So I would have expected that update. Then another issue was on Mr. Kagwa emphasized that DRM is important, increasing on our domestic resource mobilization because, of course, government needs the revenue to run the programs. But if you look at the income tax amendments that were made in 2020, I would have expected, for example, that in a bid to increase on our DRM, you would have cut out some of these harmful tax incentives to many of these multinationals. But when you look at this amendment, especially the Income Tax Act amendment, there was an exemption granted to operators who are operating in industrial park or even outside. But of course, these are operators who must have at least, they must have had a capital of around 10 million US dollars over the last 10 years. And of course, these cannot be young people, these cannot be MSEs or SMEs, these are of course multinationals. And if, I mean, why would you exempt them from tax at such a time when we are faced by the pandemic? And then in turn, basically this increases on the burden of the young people to pay tax, because at the end of the day, you're going to end up squeezing us and therefore increasing on the regressive tax regime. So I do not get that mismatch. Probably Mr. Kagwa can explain on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The gentleman. Okay, I'm going to take the lady. Yes, very short. Make your remarks very short so that I can also add the lady.
Good afternoon. Good morning. My name is Joel Osekeny and I'm a lawyer. And my question is about the tax base of Uganda. What plans does Uganda have to tax digital companies like Netflix and Apple? These companies make a lot of money from Ugandans. And how does the government plan to enforce any plans to tax those companies, if any?
All right, then the lady, and we'll be done. Mr. Kagwa, I hope you're taking notes on the questions.
Yes, good morning. So my name is Barbara Catherine, and I come from Global African Wear. Me, I'm raising a concern because Mr. Kagwa has said that the tax was pushed. They gave us a grace period to December. But right now, even when you apply for a loan, they ask you to bring your license, that you must have paid the tax. So we haven't been helped. We haven't been helped. Thank you.
All right. I'll allow Mr. Kagwa to come and make quick comments on the three questions that have been given, and then we can get into a short documentary.
Thanks for the questions. You know, I used to be a teacher, and teachers don't like questions. They love answers. So, but let me try to become now a student, answering your questions. Kafuko, you've raised a number of important issues that this money has not been accessed by the youth. Unfortunately, I didn't come with the list of who has accessed the funding that has gone to UDB and UDC already. But I can tell you, for example, in UDC, that the youth have not accessed. And what I was saying here is that the youth should go and partner with UDC if they have bankable projects, so that they can be co-financed by UDC. They could be very, very good projects. So the youth shouldn't fear to approach UDC and say, yes, it's a project, as long as it fits within the strategic plans of government. On UDB, yes, some monies have been disbursed to SMEs, but unfortunately I didn't come with that information. But I know, of course, the process is a bit tedious and people have complained about it. We are trying to see how UDB can improve this process. But the funding is already there. On restructuring loans, I think all the banks have restructured loans, including for the big people and the small people. They have been restructuring. But of course, the restructuring does not mean forgiveness. It means that instead of your loan being pronounced as a non-performing, and then recovery measures are taken against you, you have given more time within which to pay. And the interest has not significantly reduced. Some banks have reduced, but not. When we look at it, the interests are still about 19 to 20%, which is still high. But the banks have their reasons to why they are sustaining those interest rates that high. Though the Bank of Uganda has really gone down on the central bank rate, now 7%. But the banks still lend at those rates. Of course, one of the reasons is the cost of administration, the recovery, the cost of recovery of a loan when someone has defaulted. But yes, we are also talking to the Uganda Bankers Association to see what they can do to reduce these loans, because with very high interest rates, people cannot pay. On the law, the income tax amendment, the exemptions, why they have remained, and we are giving the exemptions to multinationals who can afford to have $10 million. That's a question that is coming in, and that's why I mentioned that we have formulated what you call a tax expenditure framework to cost the incentives that have been given. If we have given to a multinational, what has it done for us in terms of employment? They must demonstrate that 75% of their payroll goes to the local people. Not 75% of the employees are local, but 75% of the money that is paid is actually going to the locals. So that is one of the things that has been improved. They must be procuring local raw materials. And what does that mean? That at least the Ugandans will supply to this factory. And for the Ugandans, the amounts have been reduced to 1 million shillings, and if you're up country, to $1 million, if you're up country, to 300,000. But if you are engaged in agro-processing, there's no threshold. As a Ugandan, you can get a tax holiday. So that is what we need also to look at. Maybe we'd have more education on this matter. That's how it is. On, I think those were, Joel, the tax base of Uganda, what are we doing to tax Netflix and Apple? We are talking, we've had discussions with Google on how we can tax part of the income that is coming from here. One of the challenges is something called permanent establishment. That for you to tax anybody in your country when he's earning income from your country, he must have a fixed place of doing business in your country. Now you know that Netflix and Apple and Google and Yahoo, they don't have permanent places of business here. They just supply. We get to them through their platforms. But we are moving, like what India has done, what France has done, to agree on them that, yes, we agree that if these transactions generate income to you, you'll pay us a certain percentage. So that is the discussions we are going in. It's not easy, but we are trying. Catherine, on loans and taxes, I didn't understand that very well. But all I know is that URA right now can give you a tax clearing certificate. But we can discuss that if it's a specific thing. They can give you an income tax clearance certificate when it's clear that you are paying the principal, you have agreed to pay the principal, but the penalties and interests are waived. So you can get a tax clearance certificate. That one I'm sure. If you have had challenges on that, Mr. Rukundo is here from URA, you can have a further discussion on that and see how you can be assisted. Thank you so much.
For Mr. Kagwa. Thank you so much for giving us our keynote address, but also addressing some of the concerns that came from that keynote address. We're going to have a panel discussion on youth voices, but before we have that, we will first watch a documentary on how young people have been affected by taxes in the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd beg us to just look at the screens next to us and we watch that documentary, and after that, we will get started with our panel discussion.
Engaged both at a national and an international level. I've been part of the International Tax Justice Academy for 2019 and 2020. So as myself, I've had a platform to engage with these policymakers, with the tax legislators. So if we can also have more people, more youth engaging with the Tax Justice Alliance, it would be a good environment for us to understand the tax laws.
Previously, in contracts of employment, COVID-19 was not stated there under to frustrate these contracts. So one of the issues we have had with the labor sector, then with the taxman, is that at the time of termination of the contract of employment, the taxman still wants to impose employment income. Because employment income must be imposed under Section 19 for as long as there is a contract of employment. So one of the challenges we have experienced is that the workers have been laid off, but URA or the taxman still wants to tax. So in our opinion to you, is to make sure that when there is termination of employment, the taxman does not tax.
As a youth, you have a chance to influence tax policies, to see that the policies put in place are responsive to your needs, that through the tax policies adopted, the youth are able to achieve a good education, good health care, but also achieve in terms of employment, in terms of business, even amidst the
to one, become more sustainable, thrive, and become more resilient in these trying times. So we have come around with innovations like the Youth for Business Initiative, which is targeting young people, looking at agriculture, creative industry, the ICT area, renewable energy, tourism. I mean, all of these areas that we believe can actually excite young people, but also have a huge impact in terms of the jobs created and the young people that are involved in these sectors, but more so, practical ways of getting the youth back. And there was a lady who talked about her tax issue. You know, she's not just one of those. But again, what we have to do is to really show these young people how to get onto these opportunities that we're talking about. Yes, the money is there, but who's getting this money? We need to be able to show these young people how to get that money, when to get that money, and how best they can get that money. I think that for me would be the best way to go.
Solomon, if we could come to you, there's a lot of pressure on you to raise tax revenue, but there's also pressure on you from people who actually pay tax revenue to lessen the burden. Many young people have tax problems with this COVID-19. You just saw from the documentary, people's balance sheets have been done away with mostly. What's the tax body doing specifically for young people in the tax area to help achieve a level of tax justice where young businesses can survive through this COVID pandemic with a lesser tax burden?
It's on? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. First, the traditional tax system has always had startup costs as being deductible. That means that the costs that you incur to start up your business are subject to deduction and to reduce the chargeable income that will remain. As regards the young startups would be able to benefit from that. As regards the pressure to raise revenue, one of the directions that has been taken has been consolidating what we already have. That is, we've had a number of corporations that have been engaging in different forms of non-compliance. So we've introduced significant measures to raise compliance. Things like the digital tax stamps, raising revenue from the pre-existing larger corporations that were engaging in non-compliance. The electronic fiscal devices, the EFRIS system, that's the electronic fiscal receipting and invoicing system, is going to also do something similar, such that we'll be able to raise the revenue even from the pre-existing businesses and give which can create some form of relief for the startups. Also, you can take note that some of the areas that favor that youth have taken a keen interest in, for example, software development. Local software development has been exempted from VAT in the 2020 VAT Amendment Act. So such measures are being taken to assist the youth. Yes.
But more specifically in spaces like agriculture where young people are heavily involved, and what measures are there? Well,
one of the measures I know that was, agriculture, for example, has always been exempted from VAT. So they have benefits there. Mr. Kagwa earlier mentioned agro-processing. For agro-processing, if you're engaging in agro-processing to benefit from an income tax exemption, You do not need, there is no threshold requirement. There is no, someone talked about the 10 million US dollar requirement. That doesn't exist for agro-processing. Anyone engaging in it is able to benefit. In 2019, there was a tax which had been claimed to be somewhat distortionary to the agricultural sector. That was the 1% withholding tax on agriculture. It was removed in 2019. So those engaging in sectors like agriculture have some considerable relief.
All right, I wanted to bring in Sandra here for just a minute, basically. From the private sector, government has been very kind during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I say kind with all level of restrictions. But it's been very kind. It's not been as harsh as it used to be to the private sector. Has that helped spur development in the private sector in any way?
Thank you. I think I was at the table there when Mr. Kagwa was making some of the presentations. I went and asked the same question he asked, is what statistics do we have for the people that have so far benefited? Yes, government was kind to some extent, but to some, I don't think it was. Being a young person, I've been in business for about now coming to 10 years. I started business at about an age of 23 years. I started after my first degree from Makerere University, and going through the system up to date, I think is still not a favorable environment for more young entrepreneurs to work in. And the COVID-19 season has been the most challenging season for more young people to go through. I still believe government can do better in terms of policy, because you find even the initiatives that Mr. Kagwa talked about, most of them are still just being delivered. None of it is yet on the book. Our company, Pelere Group, we are in manufacturing. We manufacture from agro-based products. We do shea butter products. We work with farmers directly. And also we do more of quality detergents. I've been able to certify the products this year. We were able to certify about 7 of the products that we manufacture. But it has been a little bit much more tougher. And looking at even the young people that are in business now, it's more tough. So I believe government can do better. I still believe there is a lot of things we are lacking. The environment is not yet favorable, and COVID-19 has made it a little bit much more worse. Though from one benefit that I really saw during the COVID-19 lockdown period, apart from just the lockdown, because the lockdown affected a lot movements, there was transport restriction, which made us go to even less than 10% production until when the lockdown was opened up. And when the lockdown was opened, I think from URA, they gave us VAT, you could be able to submit late. I think that was one of the benefits that we were able to do. But because simply most people, we couldn't even have access to work during that period of time. But in terms of any other thing, I don't think yet government has done better, because you find even when you're pushing the loan ahead, you're paying even more than what you're supposed to pay. So it's still not yet there. I believe they can do better. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Grace, from an advocacy perspective, what kind of fiscal governance do we need to have in the post-COVID era, or even during this COVID era, but particularly that favors young people and the young businesses that they're engaged in?
I think for me, coming from a civil society perspective, and where we're looking at basically having everyone engaging in some of these processes and having the policies in place being responsive to the needs of the different groups, I think the first step is for youth to interest themselves in some of these issues. When it comes to tax, you find very, very few youth are actually interested. One, because they perceive it as a very complex issue, something that is best left to the experts. Some of them are not even aware that they pay taxes. They don't know that even if I consume a bottle of mineral water, I'm paying taxes. And it goes back to some of the campaigns we previously had where we call upon youth to take part, and most of them decide to take the backstage. It was not until last year, 2018, when we had mobile money tax and social media tax, the two taxes that were greatly impacting the youth, where they felt a pinch, where we saw a number of youth coming up to actually engage and ask government to remove these taxes. So I think one is for the youth to interest themselves in some of these processes. Those who are engaging in business, it is very important that before you start your business, you know that the different taxes that are going to impact your business and how you need to go about them. But also for youth to interest themselves in some of these processes. We know that annually, Ministry of Finance has some engagements where they are consulting people to share some of their concerns on the proposals. The challenge, though, with that is that it has not been made a public process. Very few people of the public know about.
But also you can tweet us on the hashtags that have been displayed on the screen. But we're going to get back into our panel conversation now. And I want Tony to come in here. Tony, what does a post-COVID recovery plan look like for young businesses?
I think, again, back to the whole idea of letting the young people know what opportunities are there. I think there are several great initiatives that have come up. But I'll first of all speak to my side. We have set up the Youth for Business facility, and I think I've shared a few flyers around. And that is supposed to support youth in the areas of manufacturing, ICT, the creative space that, by the way, has a huge number of young people, of course, the agriculture sector, and the tourism sector, like I mentioned before. What for us, as in our perspective, what we think is that if we revive these areas, we can have a huge number of young people getting involved. So how have we done it? We've decided to go into it three ways. Now, Director Kagwa talked about the low interest rates from the banks, and he was quite candid in saying that some of the banks have not brought down their interest rates, and some of them are still above 18%. Now, ours is a three-step strategy where we are first and foremost supporting the young people with seed funding. Okay, so the seed funding is between $10,000 to $40,000. And by the way, this is free money, not a loan, but as a grant. It's a grant. So the idea here is, if you can come in with an innovative idea that speaks to employing many young people, you can replicate the story, you can scale the story. That's what we're looking for. So depending on what you ask for, we are giving between $10,000 to $40,000. That's a great step out of our partnership. That is the Stanbic Business Incubator Limited, Stanbic Bank, and UNDP. Now, after that, we're going further to support youth enterprises with enterprise development, because as you have had, most businesses do not survive beyond their third birthday. Now, you imagine a young man in his 20s trying out a business idea. He's actually more likely to die in the first 6 months or a year. And we have seen this. So the idea here is to support these businesses to be more resilient, to thrive, and to participate in a more sustainable manner. What we do not want to see is that, just because a young man is running a business or an enterprise, it's not given priority or it's not looked at as a business that has been doing things, for a long time. What we have also come to learn is that a lot of young people are innovative and actually do business better. Look at Safe Border. Many 60-year-olds would never have thought of such, an innovation. And forgive me for saying that, but it's the inconvenient truth, So, young people have a way in which they can impact on their fellow youth in terms of jobs and opportunities, but also in terms of ideas that can actually create more opportunities. So, enterprise development becoming the second phase. And then the third phase is loan facilities from the bank. And when I talk of low, I know many of you will get shocked, but this is between 12 to 14%. Unprecedented. This is really, really low. And here we're simply saying, we want to support your businesses to thrive. We want to support you in your journey of entrepreneurship. And again, what we have also seen through this COVID period is, like you said, many people are worried about their jobs. But how about we create more young people who are entrepreneurs, who provide more jobs or more opportunities? And how about we stop creating this whole situation of job seekers, but job providers? I think that is the story that we want to be associated with. So when you talk about this whole COVID recovery phase, or recovering out of this pandemic, for us, in terms of practical steps, that is what we're doing. And we have decided to do this nationally. We have decided to go beyond just the 1-year intervention to 5 years. And that aside, we also have a new circle intervention, which is the Economic Restart Fund. The Economic Restart Fund is supposed to help a lot of young people who have circles and all of these, interesting associations to really see that, one, they're supported in terms of running those circles or associations as professional organizations, but also, two, jumping on to cheap financing of a long period of time and with support, again, on enterprise development. So it is really a three-pronged strategy which we believe, if we maximize it, can actually see a lot of recovery in a shorter period of time.
Solomon, if we could also pick your mind, a lot of young people have been entrepreneurs during this COVID-19 time. She just talked about during the lockdown, trying to do businesses differently. And one of the impediments is just how much tax you have to incur during trying to innovate around spaces like that. What's the taxman doing now, looking into the future, to encourage that level of entrepreneurship and increase employment in the economy?
Yeah, so there were a number of interventions that URA took once the measures to combat the COVID-19 pandemic came in place. The first one was allowing delayed filing of returns. And so that allowed people to file their VAT returns, payee returns. Those were the monthly returns, as well as the corporate income tax returns that were due in that period. And that was helpful for quite a number of businesses. Secondly, there's been a measure. It is in the Tax Procedure Code Amendment Bill. It's pending. Mr. Kagwa alluded to it. That is a waiver of interest and penalties that are due as at 30th June, all outstanding interest and penalties. Now, for those who have been in business and have interacted with URA, they know how big a deal that actually is. It's a major relief for them and allows them to free up some cash flow, to have some cash available to them that would have otherwise have gone to the taxman to pay up penalties and interest. So all they owe now is the principal tax. There's also been a deferral of pay as you earn, because the youth are not only the business owners, they are also employees. So there's been a deferral of pay as you earn up to 31st of December. So up for this period, no entity has to file. They have to file rather, but they don't have to remit the pay as you earn. They are allowed to keep it as for cash flow purposes. So there have been a number of sort of relief measures. But even going forward, looking further into the future, we are redirecting our attention to some of the new modes of business that are coming up. Again, Mr. Kagwa mentioned it following a question from the audience. The issue of taxing the digital economy. We are moving into that direction as well, which is tapping into new sources of revenue that have previously been untapped. So we are already making progress in that direction. Mr. Kagwa talked about the type of tax that we're looking at. It's called a digital service tax, the one that can help overcome the permanent establishment restriction. It already exists in Kenya. A number of other jurisdictions have attempted it. Currently, as things stand, our VAT law allows us to get some revenue from those entities, and we are in talks with at least 2 of them. We've made some significant progress where we expect to gain some revenue. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sandra, do these tax measures enhance your ability to do business? But if they don't, what more would you suggest?
I think yes, they do. Like I just said, when they delayed the payment, we're able to at least wait for a period to file. But also the deferred payment payee, which is talking about, has enabled us to retain workers still. But I still believe they can do more. Yes, I still believe they can do more. I still believe they can do really more. Like, for example, if it's a startup, really, at least for the first 5 years, if they could give them a holiday, a tax holiday, to enable them step up on their feet. At the time when I started business, we used not to have things like Stanbic incubators being around. Thank God right now they're around. They can even give you a seed capital. So I'm imagining someone who is starting right now, how will they be able to raise the capital that they need to be able to sustain their operations? So in that way, if they are able to lower the tax put on them, it will be much more better. Yeah.
Surely we can't give you a tax holiday for 5 years. How will government raise revenue?
Okay, let's say like 3 years for startups especially. But also, you see, let me tell you, like right now where I am, trust me, URA will be able to get much more tax from me when the business is stable. Because 10 years down the road, I'm going to be paying all these taxes, you know? But imagine a business that is just coming up. Most of the businesses don't even see their 50th birthday. I'm lucky to even see their 10th birthday by the grace of God, you know? So I believe if they are able to even do better, because you find there are other measures where tax is not yet being taken in. There are people that are not yet paying taxes, and there's money that is out there, you know, which I believe URA still can be able to tap in to be able to get that money, than squeezing an entrepreneur, especially a local entrepreneur, right here in Uganda.
Yeah. Grace, and I want to allow the audience to get in, so after Grace, we'll take some of the questions and comments from the audience. This conversation is also about having young people participate in tax conversations. What can we do more to increase young people's views on how taxes are carried out, on how taxes are implemented, having voices like those of Sandra meet with Solomon in a room and agree on getting a 5-year tax holiday? How can we have more young voices in this tax debate?
I think for starters, like I said earlier, many youth are not engaging because they think it's complex. It's first for government to take steps to simplify the tax laws, simplify the tax processes, to enable the youth appreciate them more and appreciate the spirit within which the government is working. And I would, at that point, applaud URA. They've taken steps to at least engage youth, especially those in universities. As Siatini, we've been trying to partner with them in some of these initiatives, especially when it comes to engaging tax clubs within the different universities as a platform for starters, for the youth at that level to understand some of these processes, but also appreciate. But beyond URA, there is the other arm of government that allocates, and that is Ministry of Finance. How do they allocate the resources that they are getting or that they are collecting to see that the youth are actually seeing what their money is being used for? Because if I'm a young person and I'm paying so much tax, but I do not get access to healthcare, I don't have a good education, then I'll see no reason to pay taxes. So it's also for government to take that step to see that they allocate more to services that are benefiting the youth. And maybe lastly is the issue around tax education. We see URA trying to take steps. Okay, I already talked about it briefly. But in terms of how do I, and because we know that the tax laws are really complex. You have to read the law as a whole. But how do you get those small, say, the different issues that need specific focus for me as a youth to understand and appreciate further?
All right, thank you so much. I am going to allow 5 comments and questions. And okay, you're already enough. The microphone will come to you with a sanitizer because we're trying to stay as healthy as we can. Let's start with this table, these two gentlemen, and then we'll move to the next table. Please keep your question or comment very short so that we buy time.
Thank you. I'm Alex Nwamanya, and I want to speak to the fact of bringing more young people into productivity. Recently, I was able to get an opportunity to work with the National Agricultural Organization, Research Organization, NARO, to develop pharmaceutical grade starch from cassava. So one of the challenges we face is that most of the government agencies are the ones with facilities to do such work. I think CIATIN has done a study on challenges pharmaceutical industries are facing, given that the demand for raw materials from China is high. So it's key we develop ours here. But labs and facilities of agencies are not allowing more young people to gain such spaces. Government is doing a lot of investment in such things and they are lying idle. So I would think it's key we push for a negotiation around such agencies with facilities to allow young people into such spaces. Not for internships, because internships are just for academic reasons, not for developing anything actually. The other one Mr. Kagwa mentioned is about money within the Uganda Industrial Research Institute. I think we have made attempts to reach out to them, but I don't think there is such money. Maybe if it's somewhere in documents. So thank you. That's my comment.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask you guys to stand up when you're making your question and comment so that the broadcast cameras can catch you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Daniel Bill Opio. I am a lawyer, a co-founder of Ad Security, a company that deals in artificial intelligence, big data, and cybersecurity. I would love to say that I love the language that Tony was speaking. I think it sounded better than music to me. And this month, I'm celebrating 1 year of my startup. I hope I'm able to make it beyond that mortality year and all that. But yes, my question is going to Solomon. This morning as I was coming, listening to radio, I heard of that digital services tax. The last time we heard of a tax that was touching the digital economy was in 2017, 2018. We saw what happened. Raymond and I had to go to court and challenge this over the top, you know. Yes, that tax. So when you look at some of the manifestos actually of, I don't know if this is the good for us to mention that, but of one of the political parties, when they are speaking about tax issues, they stop at 2017 because they know from 2018 onwards they messed up. So is there a way we could directly participate in the making of this new digital services tax to ensure that we don't see the negative ramifications that we saw in 2018 with the over-the-top services tax that reduced our internet penetration? At the time when there was coronavirus, we needed those platforms to be open. We couldn't have access to information. There was a lot of misinformation going on. And I don't think what is coming up is something that is good for us. We had a discussion before this began, and we noticed the foreign policy of some of these big companies you want to deal with. You mentioned that the United States of America that has been fighting every country that has been trying to introduce such a digital services tax. So how are we going to respond vis-a-vis the international community and the interests of other states? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's go to the gentleman on this table, the next table. Keep your questions and comments short. Stand up so that the cameras can get you clearly.
Hello. I would like to thank CIATIN for giving me an opportunity to discuss with such a strong panel. And as an expression of my excitement, I have questions and comments for all the four panelists. Right? I'd like to start with Sandra. And this is more of a comment. I sympathize and I actually align myself with your discussion that government might not have done enough yet, especially in regard to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm speaking specifically to the taxes. We're talking about deferment. Deferment doesn't necessarily take a problem away. It just extends it further, right? And in this case, we're behaving like alcoholics who just drink to lighten out the mood and wake up in the morning with the same problem. So after that, the startups are still going to experience the full effect of the tax burden, right? And when it comes to growing businesses in a country like ours and attaching taxation to that, the secret is to pull the feathers from the goose with the least hissing, right? So if the taxes are creating an unbearable burden on these SMEs, then the growth pattern for youth businesses is something that we might not experience in the near future. So there needs to be more done for SMEs. I've been reminded that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Alenyo Blaze Okwero. I am the programs officer at the Open Forums Initiative. It's a youth-led tax justice machine. I also want to align myself with what Grace said. There is a very lacking, there's a huge gap in youth education when it comes to taxation. We just recently conducted a quick survey with local government youth leaders. And surprisingly, we found that 85.9% of the youth have no idea of what a tax looks like. You know, we had a very painful time trying to explain these things to them. And out of these youth leaders, only about 14.1% of them were aware of what tax is. So government and the CSOs need to find a more concrete way of making sure that young people understand, because tax is the only sustainable way of actually raising revenues. Now the questions come in. So the first one goes to Tony. I love the tone you started with, especially regarding showing the way. Government has experimented over funding youth projects over a long period of time, and stories of escaping with the money have happened, people running away, unmanaged projects. And but still, within the same period of time, Stanbic Bank, where you work, I believe, has been a very firm financial partner with the government. Just very recently, partnering with IMF to give out a 6.3 trillion credit facility. So I understand the whole accelerator concept and how you intend to use seed capital and startups, but how are the banks advising government on managing this state-run funding? This is a lot of money taxpayers are paying, and it's being lost from mismanagement. Could you extend the accelerator incubator nature into the funding activities that government has? Can they move away from a loan and try to use more effective ways of giving out this money? And now the last question here is directed to the taxman himself, Mr. Solomon. The fourth industrial revolution, which we are inevitably going into, is characterized with a number of elements. But the three most clear ones is entrepreneurship, technology, and then the gig economy, right? That significantly changes the way employment is going to be done. In the 2020 tax amendments, there is an introduction of withholding on insurance and advertising agents. These jobs are largely occupied by young people, and they facilitate the growth into the full-blown digital economy. However, these taxes also create a significant cash flow problem, because withholding tax, it actually denies the small farms a huge amount of money. If you're being withheld taxes by 5 different people, we already know how hard it is to get refunds from URA. So many small businesses will end up running on empty wallets simply because more taxes than they're supposed to pay are being withheld. We already know that the smallest amount of taxes, presumptive tax, goes around 200 to 300,000 shillings. But withholding tax takes out a larger chunk. So my question is, it seems there is very little attention to the fourth industrial revolution and how we should merge our taxes to consider how the youth businesses should grow. What is the criteria government is using while engaging into taxation of the digital industry? And I side with my colleague Bill Opio by saying we need to be given extra space. What has URA done together with Ministry of Finance to engage youth, especially in this very critical thing of taxes around the fourth industrial revolution? So Thank you very much. And just as a parting note, still aligning myself to what Tony said, it is the big birds that teach the small birds how to fly. So this whole thing of saying we have given money to the youth, it's in UDB, it's here, without an effective induction strategy, seems to be a plan that will collapse before it even starts. So my name is Alenio Blaise Uquero, and I remain thankful for being here.
Thank you. Let's go to the next table and have the gentleman first, and then later the lady. The gentleman in green.
Thank you so much, moderator. My name is Africa Chiza, and I work with CEAT in Uganda. I have a comment on digital taxing the digital economy. And I think we need to create a contrast between taxing the what Google has declared and taxing based on the data, because data is the raw material of the digital economy. And whoever controls this data then exactly knows how to manipulate it. One of the changing and shifting dynamics in the digital economy is the same companies who were using tax havens are now resorting to data havens. So you find that a conglomerate can be able to conceal its big data, and because of the fact that the current global rules do not allow for source cost disclosure, where you can know that this good or these sales are coming from this kind of a country or economy, it becomes very hard to be able to tax the digital economy. So my question is, how is URA, how is Minister of Finance working with NITA Uganda, engaging ministries like trade, which are negotiating the rules that will govern the digital economy beyond OECD, because OECD rules are best endeavor. But the binding rules that the global trade, like the World Trade Organization, how are you engaging with the ministry to ensure that we have a strategy that can ensure that we are able to access data? Then two, how are you looking at the issues of diving into researching into data havens, just like you did a good job on tax havens in the physical trade? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Let's have the lady.
Thank you very much. My name is Barbara Catherine again. So I'm going to talk about SMEs, how we are affected with tax. It's a chain of production in SMEs. So when you say, I'm going to talk about the practical part. For us, I'm in making clothes. So if you don't tax us, but then you look at the businessman who is importing these materials, still it's coming back to me. Because currently, I'm going to talk about like before the pandemic, we had so many people who are bringing in fabrics. And I was at a level of looking at maybe having a factory because fabrics were cheaper then. But after the pandemic, many of these people were highly taxed. And we went back down there, you find most of the businesses are closed. So the people who are bringing in fabric right now are really expensive. A meter we're getting at 20,000, right now we're getting it at 25,000. This affects my chain of production. So I'm talking about tax. I'm an advocate for fair tax. You people, you should look at this thing because it affects us in production. This is going to bring the prices high, and people will opt for imported clothes because they will be cheaper. No one will want to buy your cloth because you find you're making it at a high price, because then the amount you acquire, the amount you put in, everything is being taxed high, and you're buying it at a higher price. So I just want you people to find a way of addressing this, of helping us. You can get the money to fit your budgets, whatever, but be fair to these people so that we can grow up as startups.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Let's come back to the panel. I'll give each of you 2 minutes, but allow Solomon some 5 minutes because there's a lot of questions coming to him. I doubt I'd want to be in his seat.
I highly doubt too. I guess mine is really just one question, and it was from my brother asking about how we are trying to support government in doing this differently. You know, I will answer this in with a story, but also a very interesting. I don't know if you know. I don't know if you know, but I think Raymond, you've been saying for the last 6 weeks, I've been going to each and every single district in Uganda, and I have been talking to the district local governments, the district commercial officers, the district community officers, and the district commercial, the cows, the chief administrative officers, and everything seems to be the same in almost all districts, especially the ones that you think are really more serious than the others, especially the ones, I mean, that have been around for quite some time. And what seems to happen is, when I was in, the story that really made me laugh was in Masaka, when we talked to the district commercial officer, and the first thing was, Youth Livelihood Fund, the tablet, yeah, I mean, how are things moving? Said, hey, recovery rate is a trick. Omuntu omuwe sente zo, next week wagamba ha, oyo yafumbirwa Mbarara, tachaliwo. You know, the person has gone to Mbarara, the person is non-existent. Then another one says, kachoyo kati musubuzi ndeba, tachali Masaka. So the problem with that is, I think, the lack of proper mechanisms to be able to follow up these guys. But also, it's the way in which these groups are set up for that facility. The intention is great. You know, the Youth Livelihood Fund is a great initiative. The M-Yoga right now, I mean, when I was moving around, there was a huge buzz around M-Yoga. But the problem is how these young people are prepared for that opportunity. So you find, I hear about M-Yoga, I will say, Raymond, you know, waliwechitambula, balita sente. Kati, gendo fune oli, let's also organize 2 guys from there. So you come into a partnership without understanding why you're even in the partnership. And then the money is given to you. What do you expect? In Liantonde, a guy, the commercial officer, was very candid with us and told us, you know, you're given the money, and then guys instantly split it. As in, like, when they talk about the money, the first thing that the leader of the group will say, okay, kationo wafuna, noli wasiga, ndoza chikola, bazirete. And in less than a week, the money has been split between the members. The problem with that is lack of a vision between the members of what they want to do exactly. Now, our approach is different. We are giving money, yes, but we want to walk the journey with you from the onset to the end. And when we're giving you the money, we're not giving it to you in one chunk. We're giving you 50%, and you are walking the journey with us. So we are pretty much business partners with you. And at the end of it all, when we see that growth, we then recommend you for further funding from any other sources. That, for me, is the best way in which you can actually have a lot of these young people getting their businesses better, but also understanding what it takes to do business. You know, not everyone is an entrepreneur. And this is something I keep telling people, but anyone can become an entrepreneur, you see. So it's very important for us to share these ideas on how to run a business. Financial planning, simple things, you know. I mean, if you ask yourself, you know, let me just end with this simple story. We were invited by the African Development Bank, and they asked me to take about 30 SMEs to Strathmore for 1 week of training, enterprise development training. We were in the training room, and in our opinion as the Ugandans in this 60 classroom setup, we're asking ourselves, why are these guys learning the basic of basics? So then the facilitator asked us, or asked the guys in the room, he was like, how many of you have a business plan? I kid you not, it was only the Ugandans who were from our incubator who put up their hands. The rest of the guys were not, did not have an idea of what exactly a business plan is. So people are doing business ad hoc, that attitude. Yeah? So because of that attitude, they are not actually seeing their businesses beyond a certain, so they cannot plan for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. But also what was also interesting to learn was, because again at the incubator, before you graduate, and again I will encourage a lot of you young business people here, young entrepreneurs, to come and enjoy our facilities free of charge. We do not care whether you bank with Stanbic or not. But what's interesting is we make sure you have a business plan, because the business plan is your dissertation and also the best way we can follow you up during the 1 year of coaching and mentorship. So I think that is what is needed, and that is what is lacking in a lot of these programs, but the intentions are great. And if done well, we can see so much happening in the, in the youth ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony, for that. Let's start with the two, then we end with Solomon, because you really have a pile of questions. Sandra, and then Grace, and then we got Solomon.
Okay, so I think for me, what I would encourage, being a young person, I'm still young actually. Yes, because I'm still below 35, so I'm still young. But being in business for the last 10 years and being an advocate for young people, just like the way he has talked about the Stanbic Incubator, I think things that have kept me in business for this while, number one was when I started business with about $15 at that time, that was about 30,000. Here I was unemployed. I was able to start working with Uganda Industrial Research Institute. And I used to just go there for technical support. But it somehow helped me to learn those key principles. From Uganda Industrial Research Institute, I went ahead to start working with Enterprise Uganda. And they taught me business skills that helped me up to now. These are skills that they keep on calling me for different trainings. So if I was right now in government, or what I would tell Ministry of Finance right now, is let's think of how do we make young people more productive. You're not looking at giving them money, but you're looking at what he's suggesting, the incubators. Are you giving them enough, maybe operation costs, just to help them take in more young people to mentor them? Because trust me, more young people need mentorship. I've seen very many people starting business, but they're failing simply because they lack that mentorship. If we could be able to focus some resources in that, instead of the cash out, I believe it's something great. I've borrowed from the bank. I'm still borrowing from the bank. My first loan I borrowed was about 500,000 shillings from Pride Microfinance. Up to now, I still borrow from the bank, But growing, I've been paying this money as a young person. Right now you can give me 100 million shillings, 200 million, I'll still pay you back, But that has been a discipline I've built over time. And I believe more young people can be able to do it if we think in that way. Then the other thing also I would tell the taxman is think about still, how do I help this young person? Don't think about how much taxes I'm going to get from that person. Think about how can I help this business thrive? Think about if you're able to think in that way, we're going to have so many businesses that will just say, I'm ready to pay my taxes. I comply. Each level I reach on, I comply. I pay VAT, I comply. Each level. But it has taken me time because there's this support you're giving me. Then also for the market, for the policy makers, I think to Ministry of Finance still, I don't think right now the finance is good. If you want microfinance, you're able to access it. But right now, for example, if I'm looking for between $50,000 and above, it's a very tight market to get in. I know you have talked about UDB. I've been in UDB for so many times. Right now, yes, I'm negotiating for equity financing. But for the other finance, they'll ask you for security, for collateral. Plus, my enterprise has a social element in it. So really, most of the investment was more in the quality of the product, more into ensuring the systems are operational and better. So I didn't put a lot of money in buying, let me say, land in this. So you find when you're going to borrow, you may lack that security, which I know it's a policy. You have to have a security before you pick this money. So also it's the same thing I would suggest. I would suggest more other loans like social loans, where you're looking at an impact more than just looking at, giving out that money, like what he was talking about earlier on. I would also suggest more seed capital to young entrepreneurs, people who are starting up. Let's do the pitching. I won UNCTAD 2016. At that time, it was a global a global competition which I won, and I represented Uganda. And it helped me a lot into pitching, you know, and that's how I won my first pitch. So let's be able to encourage the seed capital also. But also, I think for the young women, you know, when a young woman is making money, just like someone said earlier, he talked about it when he was making his presentation from Action Aid. He talked about when a young woman makes money, she's not just think about her family. She think about community. She think about her workers and all that. I so much believe, let's put gender. I'll be honest with you. I went to a place where they denied us money, and simply because I was a woman director. When they looked at the document, they were like, Sandra, we can't give you this money. You're not yet married, you know? And they couldn't give me the money. They refused to give me the money. And that's because I'm a woman. You get it? So I wish we could take out all those notes that will hinder people's progress in this journey of entrepreneurship. Trust me, the taxes will come. As long as you invest in your people, these taxes will come. Thank you so much.
I think for me, maybe just one comment that I would want to maybe respond to, the issue on import substitution, especially issues around government increasing, say, taxes on fabrics without putting into consideration the fact that there are quite a number of young people who are manufacturing or doing a lot of work around increasing value of the fabrics. So it would be good if government is putting in place such new measures, even if they're aimed at protecting the economy in the long run. They need to do quite a lot of research, but also prepare the young people in terms of how these different taxes are going to impact them and impact their businesses. And then lastly, for me, it's about government emphasizing the need for government to put in place policies that are responsive, and responsive putting into consideration the fact that there are different groups of people. Even when it comes to youth, the policies being put in place should be factoring into consideration the fact that there are rural youth, there are urban youth, there are male and female, and all these are different dynamics that should be put into consideration when it comes to policy formulation. So, and then when it comes to the youth, it's for me to urge all of you to take interest in some of these issues. They impact you in your day-to-day life, and you actually need to engage in one way or another to see that the policies are more responsive to your needs.
All right, then Solomon.
Yes, I was asked a number of questions. I'll start with Mr. Bill's questions. But before I answer the questions, I'll just start with one caveat, that URA is an implementing body. We're not the policy makers. Mr. Kagwa and I interact on the basis of Section 3 of the URA Act, which says that we can advise. So the ministry may or may not take our advice, but we will implement whatever the law will be. So the first question, I think from Mr. Bill, was as regards how they can participate in the discussion on taxation of the digital economy so as to avoid the outcomes of previous efforts at taxing the digital economy. You can do that at any time. If you if you have an idea regarding taxation of the digital economy and you write to the Ministry of Finance, you can copy in URA. There is a very good chance that idea itself will arrive at my desk, me personally. I have responded to even handwritten, literally, someone, there was a campus student, I think third year at Chambogo, who one time had an idea and wrote it down to the Commissioner General, and it trickled down to me, and I had to draft a response to it, inviting him for further discussion, and we had a discussion about that idea. So we are open to ideas. We are aware that we don't have all the information, we don't have all the ideas. Young people can have interesting ideas. It's often very helpful to have a fresh take on things. People who have been seasoned involved in things for long can begin to have, we can calcify in our minds in the way we approach certain things. So I know that we are very open. Though maybe in a more, what would be interesting would be if we could have more open discussions such as these ones. If you share something with me, I'll take it. In all kinds of ways. If you communicate, if you send the idea to URA or to Ministry of Finance, the idea will reach us. And you can be invited. We meet with stakeholders. There are some places here that are very familiar. We've met with them regarding different ideas that they may be sharing regarding tax policy. So at any time, anyone who wants to engage is free to do so. I can even share my contacts if that is desirable. And regarding the digital service tax itself, you were asking how, if we take that route, we are going to deal with the backlash from the US. The United States has been very hostile to the digital service tax. Any country, big or small, that attempts to tax through a digital service tax is, the US will threaten a trade war with you. Maybe I can just explain briefly about a digital service tax. Mr. Kagwa explained earlier that the challenge is permanent establishment. We don't have a permanent establishment in the country, so you know, Facebook, Google doesn't owe income tax in Uganda. So what a digital service tax would do is, say, create a threshold, and maybe it would function actually more akin to a kind of excise duty, but it would be under the income tax. So it creates a threshold and says, if you meet these conditions, you know, maybe a certain number of subscribers in the country, you have a certain gross turnover, or a certain amount you're getting from the country. You can say, if you have 100,000 subscribers in the country, if you're making this amount of money from the country, then you will owe 3% of your total revenues from Uganda will be owed to Uganda, and then you would have to pay it. So that's the kind of tax that we'd be looking at. So it bypasses the normal international tax regime that would look for a permanent establishment. So the US has been very hostile to that, but the US was very, very hostile to that, and the current president, who may soon be a former president. And so, depending on how things go, but based on the direction things are going right now, there's a high likelihood that that is likely to change. The US will then come into the discussion. If the new president comes on, he's likely to come into the discussion of the OECD, so that we can have more sort of harmonious the discussion regarding the digital taxes, like the digital service tax. So there is little risk there as far as I'm concerned. Then Mr. Blaze raised the issue of tax, whether we understand the digital economy, the gig economy, and basing on the fact that we are taxing people like the insurance agents, that we actually didn't introduce a new tax, we increased the tax. So there was already a pre-existing 6% tax. We just increased it to 10%. But there was something interesting that Mr. Blaze mentioned. He mentioned that I think only 14% of people who were interviewed in a study he did knew about taxes. And that's very interesting because according to the UBOS, I think it's the UBOS household survey of 2018, if I'm not mistaken, it says there are 15.1 million working Ugandans, right? Now, our taxpayer register, according to the URA report, June 2020, is 1.6 million. So we only have about 10% of the people who are active, who are working, who are earning income, who are on our taxpayer register. So that already is a problem. It shows you that when you find people who are ignorant of tax, the first thing that you should come to mind at least is that there's a high likelihood this person has never paid a direct tax in his life, his or her life. So that means we have a challenge of non-compliance. The reason why we use withholding taxes, a withholding tax works in this way. I'm supposed to make a payment to you, but in making the payment, I withhold a portion and remit it to URA on your behalf. Now, the reason why we have withholding taxes is as a compliance mechanism. The situation will be that the person making the payment is more likely easily found on URA's radar. it is probably a larger corporation, or even if it's an SME, it may be one that is easier for us to trace. Whereas the person being paid may be much harder to trace. So we use withholding tax to ease as a compliance mechanism, to ease our administrative burden. And that is why it is necessary and why I strongly support it. Now, regarding specifically the insurance advertising agents, when you look at, let's look at the case of the insurance sector. The insurance regulatory authority, if you look at the IRA regulations, an insurance agent can only work for one company at a time. You are almost entirely exactly in the position of an employee. A good number of insurance agents actually even have a desk in the insurance company. It came to the point where URA actually attempted to treat insurance agents as employees because they were earning, and they're earning these amounts of money on a monthly basis, but the withholding tax rate was only 6%, which is the withholding tax rate for a consultant or a contractor, someone who is doing his own business, but is doing business for multiple people. So different people are each withholding 6%. But in this case, you had an insurance agent who is seemingly tied to one insurance company and is almost in the position of an employee. Now, in taxation, and a principle that, based on Mr. Blaze's submission, I'm very sure he's familiar with, and he mentioned he's a lawyer, there is the principle of equity. Equity means people who are in the same position should be treated the same way. So if the income people are earning, someone is working similar to an employee, another one is an employee, they are in more or less the same position, and they're earning more the same amount of money. If this employee, the person who is treated legally as an employee, is paying 30%, but this other person we're only withholding 6%, then there is some inequity. So URA actually attempted to treat them as employees, and there was a court battle, and URA eventually lost. So a different route was taken, and now we have 10%, an increment from 6% to 10%, which in my view, if we look at the facts, is probably still lower than what it should be. We are still not getting everything we should. What should happen, what I would support as regards the insurance sector specifically, would be that we have people who can be exempted from withholding tax if they are compliant. So I would support that being introduced for them, and we will probably look into that. That if someone is an insurance agent, files his returns, his or her returns, and is compliant, then they wouldn't have to be a withholding tax applicable. Regarding the gig economy, I actually thought you seem to have it backwards, because it seems we are actually alive to the gig economy, given the actions we are taking. The fact that we are focusing on withholding tax means we understand that someone may have 3 jobs at the same time. We are aware of that's the world we are going into. Perhaps people here are doing that, have more than 1 job at the same time, and you're doing them online or something like that. So we are aware of that, and that's why we are focusing more on withholding taxes as opposed to traditional taxation, which would be chasing after you and getting you to file your income tax return. So the withholding tax may not give us all we're supposed to get, but it does give us at least something. Unfortunately, the gentleman seems to have left. He had raised 2 issues, I believe. One was on how is URA working with other MDAs in targeting the digital economy. It is true we are working with other MDAs as well, and he talked about research as well, but we are working with other MDAs. We are making effort, I would say, to work with other MDAs. We are collaborating with NITA, we are collaborating with the Financial Intelligence Authority, to see the mode in which, first to understand what exactly is going on regarding the digital economy. So, for instance, we would need to understand how much payment is leaving Uganda and going to, say, Facebook. How many people are advertising? So we could be able to access that information from the Financial Intelligence Authority to monitor pay that monitors movement of money. So we can say, okay, this amount of money is actually going to Facebook. Therefore, maybe we should really place a tax at this rate for Facebook. Or maybe we need, because we may need to consider is the benefit we are gaining from Facebook, because this is the argument the US uses, is the benefit we are gaining from the use of Facebook so great that it overshadows the need for a tax? Because those are the cost-benefit analysis would have to be made, and we will do that before we go ahead and create a final provision that we will submit to Mr. Kagwa, the Director of Economic Affairs. The gentleman also inquired about the research that we are doing on the digital economy. We've actually done quite a bit of research. If you go to the URA website, there is a research, Uganda Revenue Authority Research Bulletin that is put out every year, annually. We have a bulletin of, I believe, 2018. The entire bulletin, it's a collection of research papers done internally within URA. And the entire bulletin is full of research on the digital economy. They're all with various ideas, and we're building on those ideas, and we welcome even more research. Like I said, you can communicate to us. We've actually had organizations send us studies that they have done, which have informed tax policy. Some of the policies that you see are based on studies done by external entities. So we welcome that. And then I think Miss Barbara is her name. She raised the issue of the tax on fabrics. Now, there's this old story of, I think, a man, his wife, and a donkey, where the man sits on the donkey, then the wife walks and people complain. The wife is on the donkey, the man walks and people complain. You just can't please everyone. That's the reality, because people will always complain. Why I say that is because there are those within Uganda, Ugandan citizens, who are very excited that there are higher import duties, that there is higher import tax to pay on those fabrics, because they have fabrics available here. So they are very happy about that. So it's a delicate balance. I agree with Grace's submission that we have to find a way to balance it out. Maybe it was not, maybe the duty is too high. That can be interrogated with factual data. But if studies can be done on that. Personally, I believe a lot in studies. I don't follow so much media or rumor or anything like that. If it's empirically provable, I can buy it. So if you have a study, or if you have evidence of that is in some, there's a clear imbalance tilting maybe towards the larger corporations vis-a-vis the smaller startups, then that can be interrogated and debated, submitted to URA, submitted to Ministry of Finance. I know Mr. Kagwa is very open-minded, and he will listen to it, and we can see how to go about it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. There's just one question I think that you skipped on the deferment of tax for SMEs. May not just be a solution, it's a reprieve, but in the long run, the deferment catches up.
Yes, a very good one. Yes, I apologize for that. Regarding a kind of, I don't know, exemption waiver for startups is something I would never ever support. Well, I'm speaking personally, not for not for the institution or anyone else, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because if the person is earning income, it is chargeable income. It has not been exempted by any law. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You're earning. Okay, first think of different scenarios. Consider Phoenix companies. A Phoenix company is a company which just keeps reinventing itself. So I can be a perpetual startup. I can always just register another company. You can have the same shop in Chikuvo just reinvent itself every year as a new company. So it doesn't make any sense. But more fundamentally, the person is actually earning income. And businesses vary. There are businesses, I agree, that can take even 10 years before they make any actual money. When you read about some of the sectors like the oil and gas sector or the mining sector, I marvel at the investment people can make. Someone pours $10 million over a period of 10 years before he or she has made any income, and they're still continuing to pour more and more money, waiting to make, hoping that, prospecting, you know, they're just hoping that they may find gold, and then they may not find it, and it may be a total loss. But then there are businesses that might hit it big on day one. There are businesses, For example, take an example of the way Matters Day used to be in Namugongo. There are businesses that exist for just that week, in Matters Day week, and they make a killing, and that's enough to keep them going. Or maybe they exist literally within that week only and stop to exist. There are all kinds of businesses that can exist. So we cannot possibly have a fixed, even a 1 year reprieve, 3 year, 5 year. For me, I don't comprehend how that would be. What I see in the law seems to be very reasonable. The law says you have 4 years in which the first 4 years of your business, you claim 25% of your startup capital in each year. Your startup costs, you can claim them, 25% of them in each year. And for me, that seems fair. That seems reasonable. Along with, if we look at other expenses, it's likely you may not even have any tax to pay. If you don't have any income chargeable to tax, you will not pay any tax. If you're making a loss, you will not pay any tax. So it seems reasonable and fair for the startups. For those in niche sectors with peculiarities, like we've talked about the VAT exemption on development of software, local developed software, arrangements can be made like that. But by and large, I cannot conceive of a general exemption for startups. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Solomon. A round of applause for our panelists. They've done incredibly amazing. And thank you so much also for listening to them. But I want to now immediately invite Mrs. Jen Nalunga. Oh, she has delegated her duties. Yeah, but I think that my job here too is done.
Thank you. Ms. Jane Nalunga is delegated to the youth. That's why I'm here. Thank you, Raymond, our moderator. Please put your hands together for Raymond. Once again, our panelists, thank you for a job well done. And I think my role is simple, just to note that this dialogue has taken place at the right time. And I think the youth, most of you have not had the chance to participate, but I believe that your presence here is very critical, and also we note that all your views will be forwarded to Ministry of Finance. Up to now, Mr. Kagwa is still here. It's not that he has nothing to do. He's very, very busy. And I think for me, it shows the partnership that he has with civil society, the youth, but also continuously engaging him. I would also to point out that Mr. Otoa is also very busy. Thank you for being part of us, but also sharing the opportunities, ideally, with the youth. Key takeaways: we are all taxpayers. However, we need to participate in all the tax processes. We need to demand for accountability, and we should not be shy to ask. If you don't know, please reach out to everyone. This dialogue has presented us with opportunities. We are always learning. Some of us have not had these courses, but I can ably engage with Mr. Kagwa and challenge him, and sometimes he takes some of our proposals. Please research and always speak up and engage. That was our byline for today. There are different opportunities that exist at URA, Stanbic Bank, as well as from the private sector. And we've also noted that we need to be mentored, ideally. We need to walk the journey with those who know. We need to have this conversation going on all the time. For us, this is not a one-off. It's part of our work that we do at CEATIN Uganda under the Financing for Development project. We do thank the media team, NTV, as well as the media houses that are represented here, but also not forgetting the CEATIN team that has been part of these preparations. To our partners, ActionAid Uganda, we don't take it for granted. It's not only financial support, but also technical support. And we believe that together we can influence all progressive, inclusive, and accountable tax policies and practices in Uganda. Then I think just to sum it up, but also to emphasize that Ministry of Finance is in the process of collecting admin tax proposals for next financial year. We always, I think we've learned over time that we shouldn't wait for January and February, but the period is now. If a regressive tax is passed next year, well, sometimes it's beyond us, but at least we need to add our voice to this conversation. And with those so many words, I declare the meeting closed, and thank you for participating. You see my colleagues for a modest facilitation before you leave. Thank you.